So Ponch, you and I, as former naval officers, we're no stranger to SoCal, being in and around San Diego and LA. And as many times as I've been there, I had never been there and it was pouring down rain as if you were in Kentucky in the middle of June and it was a summer thunderstorm. And I brought all that rain with me because our friend, Patrick Van Horn, who is the author of Left of Bang, connected me with Jon Becker, the CEO of Aardvark Tactical, who's joining us today from Laverne, California. How are you, Jon?
I'm good, buddy. Thanks so much. And just for future reference, when you live in Southern California, you know this, but being from New York, you don't. It's rude to bring your weather to California.
Well,
So next time, just leave your rain at home. We don't need that water falling from the sky.
tell you, it definitely crashed my orientation because, yeah, I've never been there and the sun wasn't shining. San Diego, I've seen clouds, but I never saw rain. So
Yeah, no, it happens once a year. And, every year we threaten to reduce our tax payments to make the weather machine go back on, and it does.
So our buddy Patrick Van Horn, my brother Marine, who wrote a great book called Left of Bang with another buddy from the Marines, and it became a sensation. And I had taken that book and applied it in the asset management world for years. And Patrick and I, as we became friends over the years, he pings me out of the blue, "Hey, you're going to get a call from this guy, Jon Becker." I was just on a show and OODA Loop came up and I told him that he had to talk to you. Then one day I get a call from a California number and here you are. And then what did I do? I packed up, I flew out to LA. We recorded a great session. And then we spent time the next day, about 5 hours of organically constructing John Boyd's OODA Loop sketch, which we'll get to. But I want to start from the top. Ponch and I have a very specific way that we talk about John Boyd and his work across the board. OODA, what he's most commonly known for, which is only really a small piece of actually John Boyd's complete corpus of work, is what he's most known for, particularly in the world of tactical, SWAT, military, special operations, Marine Corps, fighter aviation. And Ponch and I are on another level with this in the sense that we've been in the archives of John Boyd. We interacted with his acolytes frequently, and we're on a mission to make sure that the authenticity of Boyd is taught and trained and understood, because when people that understand the tactical version understand the authentic version, it opens up minds and ways and up opportunities that they've never even realized. Ponch, would you add anything into that from our mission standpoint?
No, I think the closed OODA loop, it misses the enacted part of the real OODA loop, and that is the engagement or the agent's experience with the environment, right? And that's probably the key reason why you don't want to use that closed OODA loop in anything.
So Jon Becker takes the dare, calls me, I fly out there, we sit down, we have a podcast on Jon's Debrief Live, which we highly recommend. That's not just that episode, just in general, because it really does play to a lot of the things that we talk about with our clients. Jon, you sit me down, you take it from there. And then let's walk through the whole process of what's getting us to where we are right now.
Yeah, it was really interesting when I interviewed Patrick. Obviously Patrick, really bright guy, wrote a fantastic book, Left of Bang, that now it's been a decade, and I had Patrick on to talk about Left of Bang. A decade later, what in your thinking has changed, and somewhere along the lines we started talking about OODA and orientation, and we finished the podcast, and he's like, "Oh my God, you've got to talk to this guy, Mark McGrath." He's like, "This guy," and I'm like, "The guy from Sugar Ray?" And he goes, "No, the other Mark McGrath." Got it. He says, You've got to talk to him. He's really understands Boyd and is making an effort to teach Boyd authentically. And it was, you have these moments where you realize you look through the world at the lens that you carry, right? We all have a lens that we look at the world. And I had always seen Boyd as this, the way that Boyd is taught in the tactical community, which is a very reductionist. I see the coffee cup, I reach for the coffee cup, I adjust my grip, I grab the coffee cup, I drink from the, and this kind of notion that you and I both have an OODA loop spinning, and if my loop is spinning faster than your loop, I win every time.
Mm-hmm.
And then, I start talking to you and watching and reading what you're teaching, and it was kind of like my entire world changed with regard to OODA. It went from this man has fire to, man has, 6 burner, double wide, wolf stove. And it was interesting because there were things that always bothered me about Boyd and the way Boyd was taught, but you couldn't really like it was a good framework to kind of understand all the things that you have to do to make decisions and act, but it wasn't an applicable thing. You couldn't take the OODA loop and go forth and understand your relationship with the world. And it was this very shallow, monolithic, linear process that candidly I feel like I've found the six burner stove with regard to Boyd.
Well, we like to think that we're bringing a flamethrower at least
Yeah.
versus a six burner stove.
Yeah.
Um, well, so I walk into this phenomenal studio that you're sitting in right now. I'm in New York, Ponch is in Virginia, and you're there in California in the studio that we sat in eyeball to eyeball talking, and we kick it off. What was the first thing that really hit you that, made you think that this is not how I understood it. This is adding to what it is that I know, or this is hitting me in a place that like I need to learn more. What was it? What was, I think, the first shot fired, if you will?
I think the initial discussion about the OODA sketch, right? The one time Boyd drew OODA and the disproportionate weight of the OODA sketch, how orientation is prime, how orientation is fed by all of these things, cultural heritage, etc., and how those implicitly guide and direct not only your observation, but also, your decisions, your actions. And when you look at it from that perspective, that orientation is prime and that kind of your mission is to align your view of reality against reality, Boyd makes a lot more sense. There are several different directions to go with that, but it is ultimately orientation being prime makes a lot more sense. Its effect on not only what you sense, but how you sense. And then not only how you make decisions and why you make decisions, but then actions, and kind of the non circular relationship between orientation and how it drives the other three aspects, makes it make a lot more sense and also makes it a lot more applicable. You look at it and you go, okay, so really my primary objective in everything I'm doing is orientation. It is aligning what I'm seeing in the world with what is actually happening in the world and trying to make sure that I am holding my orientation as close to reality as possible. And when you look at it from that perspective, now all of a sudden you question how you sense. You question what am I looking at and what are the things that I'm observing and how is my implicit bias from my orientation driving what I'm sensing. You question, how you make decisions, how you act. And to me, it was like the lights came on Boyd, and I've had the same reaction. I've had a lot of emails and text messages from people who've been in the tactical community a long time and teach and talk about Boyd. They're like, "Oh my God, I had no idea it was this robust."
Yeah, I mean, that's the first of all, thanks for that, John, because that, not that it validates what Ponch and I do. Ponch and I work on this daily 24/7 because we don't want Boyd to be ossified and memorialized in granite and frozen in time.
Yeah.
Boyd left this work intentionally open. And at the same time, there is a headwind in that the inauthentic understanding of his work puts a wet blanket on the authentic work that's actually what is discovered and described by him to unleash human performance in ways that we didn't even know that are possible. And I always say, the way I say it, the Marine Corps, they taught me this, they gave me the basics, I got the what, but something about it, you say, I'd love to know what bothered you about Boyd. We could talk about that for our No Way Out audience. But what bothered me about Boyd, and I didn't really get into this until after I left the Marine Corps, was that there's got to be something more to this. This makes perfect sense, but there's this massive but there's got to be more. And where it hit me, and I've said this on a million podcasts, I probably said it on yours too, if I recall, that when I got out, I stepped out and I realized that I was seeing, I did. I talked about the great financial crisis. Why was I seeing it differently? And why were people jumping off skyscrapers or jumping in front of traffic on the New Jersey Turnpike or in front of subway trains? If you remember that conversation that we had, what's going on? And that's really what opened me up to realizing that Boyd was onto something, and that reducing him to a little circular model is putting your two hands behind your back and tying your ankles together.
Yeah, it's taking Shakespeare's work and saying, so this guy wrote this book, and one time he said to be or not to be.
Exactly.
No, that was not what his work was. That was a sentence from his work that doesn't even capture a small percentage of it.
And never mind all the fascinating geometry that's associated with Shakespeare's work, but that's another story.
Yeah.
We'll save that one
Yeah,
for later.
exactly.
What were some of the things that bothered you about Boyd? So I had the things that bothered me about Boyd. I thought there was something missing, or there's got to be more to this. What were the things that you thought about?
So the way Boyd is taught is a very reductionist view, right? This is the way that you see, sense, make decisions, and act. And it always bothered me that, one, that they're equally weighted, because it doesn't feel like they should be equally weighted when you think about it. It's not like you spend 1 minute observing, 1 minute orienting, 1 minute deciding, 1 minute acting. There's obviously a disproportionate relationship between those four components. The other thing that really bothered me with it is it was a framework that explained kind of how decisions were made and how actions were taken, but it was not actionable. Ending the kind of linear approach to OODA maybe gives you a framework to understand how the brain works a little bit, but it's not something you can take action on. You can't, you can go, oh, well, I need to speed up my loop. So what does that mean? Well, it means I sense faster and I make decisions faster and I act faster. And like, that's not a thing. And I think that when you start to dig into it deeper, you look at orientation, and let's just take orientation since it is prime in this. When you look at the work on a deeper level, destruction creation, kind of Boyd's concept of mental models and how you're going to take mental models apart, constantly be rebuilding them, then a lot of things come into play in the way you lead and the way you make decisions, right? You start to look at, okay, well, actually, I do need diverse perspective. I need to root out my own implicit orientation biases because they pull me farther away from reality. You start to recognize how prime that decision is going to be, and how the passing of information among a team, through the team, aligning situational awareness, how critical that is. It doesn't feel that way when you look at it in a linear fashion, but when you look at it, using the OODA sketch and looking at the primary position of orientation, you now go, okay, well, we really need to make sure that what we're doing the best is aligning orientation. We're having common operating picture. We're sharing information effectively. We're rooting out our implicit bias. We're looking at all the things that drive the way that we look at the world. And in that context, now the OODA sketch in kind of the whole OODA concept begins to explain a lot of things that happen in business, like the financial crisis, right? Where one guy looks at it and goes, "Yeah, this is completely fakakta, and everybody's wrong," right? Which is an insane thought to go, "Yeah, everybody's wrong. The government's wrong. The financial companies are wrong. The insurance companies are wrong.
Rating agencies.
The rating agencies are wrong.
Yeah.
Like everybody is wrong." And you had a couple of people who were completely contrarian that were like, no, what they're looking at, the lens they're looking at right now is not an accurate lens. It is not reflective of what's actually happening. And the delta between the way they're perceiving it and reality is such a great delta that there's an arbitrage to be had there. There's an opportunity to move in between those two and take advantage.
I mean, that's a very apt description of what understanding Boyd authentically and understanding OODA loop sketch, and loop in quotes. You realize that, I forget the exact number, I want to say off the top of my head, it's 30 total arrows, 30 total directions inside of the OODA loop sketch versus one circle. And when you think about just using the great fight, just take the movie The Big Short or the book The Big Short as an example. That's exactly what you just described, is that people were willing to crash their orientation, because really it's orientation that kills. It's not speed. It's orientation that kills. If your orientation is off, speed doesn't matter. You're just going to go off in the wrong direction.
Yeah, you're just going to hit the wall at a higher rate of speed.
We talked about on your show, how Blockbuster was really fast. They had a lot of clout. They had a lot of capital. They were number one in every category, and they were going really fast in the wrong direction. And the rest of the stories.
If you look at today's news, Netflix is buying Warner Brothers.
Insane.
The guys who used to mail you DVDs at your house in an envelope are buying the largest, one of the most successful movie studios in history that
Mm.
includes Discovery. It includes all of these things. And the other studio's argument, Paramount's argument is this isn't fair. It creates a monopoly because Netflix, the guys who used to mail you DVDs and everybody thought was crazy, is the most powerful media company in the world. It's not fair to
Yeah.
us. It's
So
fascinating.
So we brought up on the show, on your show, the Blockbuster example. And I made a comment that the Netflix that beat Blockbuster back then is not the Netflix that beat that's there today. It's one that constantly crashes their own orientation, rewrites their own orientation, constantly adapting. And the only way that you do that, now whether they have somebody inside teaching them Boyd and in OODA Loop Sketch, we can only guess. But at least inherently, successful organizations, successful SWAT operators, successful fighter pilots, successful Marine officers, whatever it is, inherently they understand what it is that Boyd has discovered and describing. And it's when they actually understand it explicitly, that's when the geometric results come.
Yeah, no, completely agreed. And I mean, I see that in my own career, right? Like I am by nature contrarian. It's just I've always been that kid, and so I'm absolutely willing to believe that the entire world is wrong. You know, and that's why you start a company, right? I had a friend, a private equity friend, years ago that said the problem with private equity as a concept is you take people who, by their nature, believe that the world is wrong and that they're right, and you give them fuck you money, and you hope they don't say fuck you and leave. And you know what? They always say fuck you and leave because they're contrarian by nature. And I think that the fact that I am so contrarian in my thinking, OODA made perfect sense to me. It's like, yeah, everybody can. There can be group psychosis. The world can see the thing wrong, especially when you look at the kind of, let's call them structural biases that are built into a company. We talked about Kodak on the show, right? And like, okay, you're the guy at the House in the Hamptons, and you're the Kodak board member, and you've made your entire life on film, and film is amazing, and film's never going to change. Because if it changes, well, then your world is going to change. You're going to lose your primary position in the world, and so you become emotionally invested in carrying on that misaligned orientation. And the longer you do that and the bigger the group becomes, the farther from reality that orientation gets. And pretty soon you have, the 2008 financial crisis where everybody sits around and goes, "Oh, I can't believe it happened." Really? You can't believe that people were over mortgaging their houses and that mortgage companies were taking terrible loans and bundling them together and wrapping them around insurance policies. And yeah, I had a friend that was at Bear Stearns, and he at a family dinner was explaining how derivatives worked and kind of how he was involved in a lot of the mortgage trading and the tranche, the tranche wrapping and all the stuff they're doing. And he explains this, and I was the only one listening after about 30 seconds because everybody else was bored and had no idea, and I'm a big enough nerd that it made sense. But he explains it, and he goes, "You get it?" I said, "Yeah, I get it." I said, "You're taking a piece of shit, and you're wrapping it in a piece of bacon, and you're calling it shit with bacon. And then you're handing it to somebody else who's insuring it, and they're wrapping another piece of the bacon around it, and they're calling it a bacon with shit. And by the time we're done with about 7 layers of bacon, this is a bacon wrap fillet. But in the end, it's just a piece of shit wrapped in bacon." And he's like, no, you don't understand. You don't understand. Well, Bear crashes. He loses his money. He texts me and goes, "Yeah, it was a piece of shit wrapped in bacon." But the whole industry was like, no, it's going to work. And so you can see how with somebody who puts orientation in the middle and is constantly destroying and creating, to coin Boyd's phrase, their own mental models,
Yeah.
they're not going to get wedded to an incorrect orientation.
So it's one of the questions that you asked me, and I said, well, we've got to go back a little further first. So because you had asked me, walk me through OODA as a concept, and I said we got to go back a little further and really understand Boyd, because what ended up happening, and I said this on your show, was that there he is, a retired Air Force colonel, and he can't get over this concept of this idea that keeps bugging him, is like, how did I come up with the aerial attack study? How did I come up with energy maneuverability theory? How did I do all these things with all the other crap that I have to do that keeps me busy? How was I able to figure this out? Which is what precipitated his sort of monastic exile, self-imposed exile, to come up with destruction and creation. And what I told you on the show, and what we say repeatedly, one of the easy, and now I think, Jon, that you can identify this now. one of the easiest tells that people that are coaching OODA or telling you about OODA, one of the easiest giveaways is likely they've never read Destruction and Creation or heard of it. And I've had the, I'll call it, say, privilege to review some things that somebody sent me, books and papers and things. And I go right, the first place I go is always right to the reference section. And you almost never see a Boyd primary source. And if you see Destruction and Creation, it's given a very sort of mystical touching, just like almost like well, we have to talk about it, but they don't understand what it is that Boyd's actually doing to get people to break down and shatter their correspondence of what they think is reality, to reassemble it through synthesis, to show them a better picture of reality that will never actually be actual reality, and constantly revise and update that in order to improve their capacity for free and independent action. Nobody will say that. We say it because we understand it and we believe it, and we put it to the test, and we talk about it, and we interact with people that directly did this with Boyd, from his inner circle. That I think is what I noticed when I went out there. The mismatch that we ran into and that we worked through and reoriented together, and then the next day training SWAT officers for 5 hours, that to me was like the biggest thing that hit. They didn't really understand what was behind it to get to OODA even in the first place, and they realized that you couldn't reduce it to just this little four-step tactical model.
No, which is, I mean, honestly, is fantastic, right? Like, for me, 2 days with Mark McGrath talking OODA is like drinking off of a fire hose. You capture little bits, and the rest of it is just all over the place, right? There was so much information that I've gone back and listened to the episode a couple of times and reread things in preparation for writing my column for the NTOA. You and I had subsequent conversations, and I kept picking it up and looking at it. And it's, in the end, I think to some degree, Boyd had this brilliant epiphany that, not to coin a common phrase, but like, we're living in a simulation. We are always living in a simulation. We are always living in a perceived version of what is actually happening. And I think that one of the biggest takeaways for me was this belief that you're never accurately seeing it. Never. If you're standing there when it happens, looking at it, you are still judging it through your life experience and culture traditions and all of the things that lie in the middle of the orientation. And the minute that you accept that you're living in a simulation, then there isn't ego involved. And, well, I see it the real way. You're not seeing it correctly.
Mm-hmm.
You're seeing part of it. And so instead of standing there thinking you have everything, look for other perspectives. Walk all the way around the elephant, and then ask other people that walked all the way around the elephant what the elephant actually looks like. And I think that opens up kind of a humility in your own, your own alignment with reality.
Yeah.
That then makes a lot of the things that I teach in culture-centric leadership, of group sourcing or crowdsourcing things, and doing kind of collaborative planning and trying to have diverse perspectives in your group. Like, all of those things suddenly came into like, yeah, I believe those things because those things align orientation.
Yeah. Ponch turned me onto a term years ago, controlled hallucination. It's a controlled hallucination. And I reacted the same way you just did.
Yeah. No, I mean,
but then, like, you think about it, you're like, holy shit, it is a controlled hallucination. Like, we really are a controlled hallucination to interact with our reality that is only basically like it's a movie camera, sensing of what, and it's processing in, and it's what we compute and wherever we calculate our orientation, that is still not aligned with what actually is.
Yeah.
And that's where
you stop and think about, like, all of the information you ignore constantly, right? The weight of your clothes on your body, the sound of your own breathing and heart rate, the pressure of the chair you're sitting on. We're ignoring millions of pieces of data every day. You and I had the conversation about being in Manhattan.
Yeah.
When you grew up in LA,
right.
You're never in the kind of circumstances you are in Manhattan. And the first time I went to Manhattan, the biggest thing I noticed is nobody looks at anybody else. There's no eye contact, right? And I thought, man, that's really weird. Nobody makes eye contact. But the longer you're there, the more you realize if you make eye contact with everybody, your head's going to explode.
Mm-hmm.
So, everybody is just kind of focused on their own thing and in their own thoughts and listening to headphones. And Like, everybody has kind of put themselves in a bubble because there's so much stimulus that you can't orient to it all. And so you have to recognize that if that's the case, if we're constantly ignoring things all day, and oh, by the way, our hearing doesn't cover the full spectrum of sound, our vision doesn't cover the full spectrum of light. Like, we know we're looking through a toilet paper tube at part of an elephant and trying to orient off of it, then that's kind of liberating because you don't have to know everything, but you can surround yourself with people that will reorient you and allow you collectively to align that orientation as close to reality as you can to then inform what you're looking at, what you're observing, the decisions that you're making and the actions you're taking.
And I would add that it's not even that you don't have to know everything. You also accept and understand through humility, as you mentioned, as we talked about in the show, that it's impossible for me to know everything. And that's why
Right.
Boyd rejected the term being called an expert. He thought that an expert was he took it as extreme offense because that would suggest that I'm not learning. And ultimately, orientation and implicit guidance and control and OODA sketch, that's all about how you learn, how you create novelty. It's a learning experience. That's the critical part. And if
Well,
you're
it
not,
begs it begs education, right?
yeah,
Like, if the minute you recognize that, life is a constant fight for orientation and reorientation, it has to make you crave more information. It has to make you crave more knowledge, right? I mean, I've been that way my whole life. I always want to learn more. And I've said for a long time, I'm willing to talk to anybody that is passionate about anything because if they are, they're going to be interesting. And even if something you don't care about, something you're not interested at all. I watched a documentary a few weeks back about ballet shoes and the company in New York that makes ballet shoes for, the Met, who go through a ridiculous number of ballet shoes, by the way. Didn't I thought that was like, oh, you wear them for a while, like one performance. But it was the company that works with the ballerina, and they talked about how, it aligns the bones in the foot and that affects everything else. And I'm 15 minutes into a documentary on ballet shoes going, this is the most interesting documentary. And it's something I had never thought about, right? Because if you believe Boyd's tenant, then you should be creating information and you should constantly be striving to learn. And you're never going to be an expert at anything.
this is where I'll bring Ponch in. I mean, this is why Boyd was not a specialist. He pulled from everywhere. He'd be as interested in art and ballet shoes as he would fighter jets and fighter engines, in the sense that these things apply universally. And one of the things that I mentioned on your show is that when you look at the scope of Boyd's work from a subject topic category standpoint, it's not limited at all to military history or to science and engineering. It's philosophy. It's specifically Eastern philosophy. It's manufacturing processes in Japan. It's literature. It's big time. It's finding this everywhere. And we say all the time, it's only applicable where humans make decisions and act. So
Well, I'll give you an example. So we released a documentary called Confronting Hate, and it's about the Pittsburgh Tree of Life synagogue attack.
yeah,
And, on the debrief, we are constantly telling stories about tactical events. And the purpose of the show is to provide professional tactical operators with an understanding of what occurred at the event, the decisions that were made, why they made them, help them to orient to that kind of an event. And so we put it together and I sent it to a friend who was the president of one of the major studios. And I said, hey, just watch it and let me know what you think. And he said, I think it's very well done. I think it makes a lot of sense. And I think it serves the audience you want, but nobody's going to ever want to watch this outside of the industry. And I said, why? And he said, because the way you're telling the story is not the way Hollywood tells stories. And so that started me on a 3-week deep dive on hero's journey, story arc, everything else.
mm,
And I then went back and rewatched the footage through that new lens and realized I know exactly what he's talking about because I cut out in the process of making that documentary, we cut out all kinds of stuff that is relevant and interesting. As an example, I'll give you all the emotional stuff,
mm.
right? I mean, everybody that entered that synagogue was permanently affected by it. And in my interviews, they were very emotional interviews. The guys hadn't talked about this in 7 years. They'd been under a federal gag order. So it was opening Pandora's box in every single interview. And so I cut out all the emotional stuff, and I cut out the emotional stuff because I know that a professional tactical user is, the show to some degree is medicine. And the more bitter that medicine is, the less likely they are to take it. And so when I went back and rewatched the footage, I was like, oh my God, I didn't even notice this stuff the first time when we edited the movie. I didn't even see it. So we're going to do a complete recut of the movie and launch it as a different kind of consumer facing piece. But it was taking off the lens that I always looked through and picking up somebody else's lens and having this moment of like, I didn't even see this stuff the first time I watched it because that's not what my orientation was.
And then reorienting.
And having the humility to let somebody tell you, I don't like this. This
Mm-hmm.
is not good. This needs to be done differently from their lens.
Mm-hmm.
And then having this kind of moment of liberation where I looked back and I was like,
I
oh
mean,
my God,
that's the
there's so
debrief,
much
right?
stuff here. Yeah,
That's the
100%.
debrief, right, Ponch? That's the value of debrief.
Yeah, it's the idea of control is outside in, bottom up. And going back to what Boyd explored with the Toyota production system, he identified that. He said, control is always outside in, bottom up. Go back to Blockbuster, right? They failed because they were trying to go inside or top down, inside out, right? Same thing with Kodak. So that empathy, putting yourself in the shoes of the consumer, potential consumer, is critical, right? And it's tough to do, John. I think Moose and I struggle with that. Even though we know this stuff, it's hard to do, right? Doing the hard things is getting out there and understanding what that lens is from the perspective of others. So good on you for doing that. It's awesome.
Well, Ponch, you bring up Toyota, right? Like, we're all old enough to remember when the United States was the biggest car manufacturer in the world, and what Toyota did. And if you really look at Kaizen and you kind of look at Toyota's concept in manufacturing, you can go, well, they're empowering the workers, they're pushing down responsibility, they're doing all these things. Really, what they're doing is they're getting ground truth constantly. Right. The big three were, the supervisor is the one that understands what's going on, and the guy on the line doesn't know what he's doing. So when the car is coming down the line in a big three manufacturer and it's got, a bent panel and the gearbox didn't quite go in, there's a rework department that's going to unscrew all that at the end because it's the supervisor that's going to push the stop button on the line. And he's not going to want to do that because it costs a lot of money. And Toyota's like, no. The person that knows the most about fitting a door panel onto a car is the person who fits a door panel onto a car. So let's listen to that person and accept their truth and use that to reshape everything that's downstream from them. It's fascinating.
Yeah, I'm going to get this wrong, but it's Genshi Genbutsu.
Genshi Genbitsu.
But yeah, go see for yourself. Go to the source. And we've done a lot of work with actually with Toyota over the years to work inside of Toyota Motors North America and other Toyota organizations to actually see what's going on in there and bring John Boyd's observer-oriented side act loop in there as well. There's another interesting connection that I think, as we're talking about TPS and the OODA loop, and that is when people talk about Agile software development, they often associate that with Scrum. And Scrum, according to the co-creator of it, who used to be a fighter pilot, says that Scrum comes from the OODA loop of fighter aviation and the Toyota production system. Moose and I now know that that's not necessarily true. OODA is not from fighter aviation, but the OODA loop, according to John Boyd, is highly informed by the Toyota production system. So now there's again, this going back to our fighter aviation community, we get this wrong quite a bit, right? Everybody comes out, they jump around and their flight suits, get on stage, try to close the gap between some desired high definition destination future state and where you are today. Well, that's great. And that works in a complicated system. That doesn't work in a complex environment, right? So there's a lot of interesting connections here. I'm by the way, I'm totally enjoying this conversation, just sitting back and going, I'm so proud of Moose jumping in there and doing what he's doing, because it's fucking fantastic to hear this story, John. I really appreciate that.
Well, John, you're speaking Ponch's language and you start talking about like Kaizen and Toyota production systems.
Yeah, no, it's freaking awesome. I'm going to throttle back and just sit back and enjoy this. So Moose, back to you, brother.
Well, so then we go through, let's take it to day 2. So John and I finished recording. I got a great tour of Pasadena, which I always wanted to see because my great aunt and great uncle used to live there and I never had gone out there. And I got to see the Rose Bowl and we went out for ramen. And the next day we go back to Aardvark Tactical HQ and we have members of the California Association of Tactical Officers. Now these are things what we have, John, 11 or 12.
Yeah, there was a strategic leadership program for Cato.
Okay, so the leaders, and these are leaders that are high performance, high octane, high human performance SWAT officers, right? And then, I wasn't the only Marine in the room. We had a couple Marines, a couple soldiers, a couple airmen. We fill a room with egos, don't we, John? Like it was a conference room filled with egos. And what I felt was that I looked out to 12 guys and they're like, we are going to nail this guy. He doesn't know shit about OODA because we have the OODA down through our marksmanship training, our tactical training, and what happened over the next 5 hours.
So I think your orientation was wrong. I think they look like that just because they, tribal tattoos, testosterone and small t-shirts. I think that the whole point of the strategic leadership group is it is 12 guys that have been handpicked from all over the state of California to be mentored by the smartest people we can find with an idea that over the course of the 18-month program, we see them 9 times for 2 days. We are going to build a higher level of tactical leadership and start to really change the community. So the goal with this group is walk in with no ego and learn from everybody you sit down with.
Let me reorient and rephrase. Tension. There is tension between what I'm going to talk about. I sensed it, and what they. That's what I meant to say. But let's be honest. I mean, these are pretty, between me, you, and them. This is a group of confident men. I mean,
there was no shortage of testosterone or confidence.
Yeah,
it is 15 alpha males sitting in a room together,
and
arguing over something that they all think they understand.
Exactly. That was the mismatch, the tension of their understanding of OODA and what happened over the next 5 hours. Okay. Now that we reoriented, we're realigned on that. Take it from there.
Yeah, I mean, you completely disrupted their notion, right? Like it's the same thing you did to me. Is you think you understand this very simple concept. One of my favorite sayings is that the world is a very scary place when you don't have any knowledge. The water falls from the sky and lightning and thunder and earthquakes and planets and there's all these things that you don't understand, and so you have to fill in that gap with whatever mythology you do to make sense of it. You get a little bit of knowledge. And the world makes more sense, it becomes stable, and it stops being scary. You get a little more knowledge and you realize we actually don't really understand shit. And, we can't even reconcile astrophysics and quantum mechanics. So we don't totally understand. That was one of those moments where, you're like, okay, now that you understand that, here's what it really means. And you can watch everybody just kind of sit there and go, oh my God, there is so much more here that I didn't understand. And I don't think you're going to eat a plate of Boyd in a single serving.
No. Oh, no.
This is going to be a lifelong
We've been
buffet.
doing it for 30 years and we're still not done. And G.I. Wilson, his friend and collaborator in the Marine Corps, said, I met him in 1979. He died in 1997. It's 2025 and I'm still learning from the guy.
Yeah, I think Boyd was one of those people. You could say was a savant or you could say, whatever. He was one of those people that just looked at the world a little bit differently. He just had an ability, like some musicians do, where you go, where did that come from?
And I think with the group that we had there too, on some levels, it did seem like I guess I went in there and I pulled the rug out from under people, but really I wasn't. I was just refining knobs, and then they were able to come to their own conclusions, and then we together as a new orientation of instructor and student constructed OODA loop sketch from the ground up, and they did all the work.
Yeah, it was interesting because generally speaking, when somebody teaches something as complicated as this, it is much more a top-down kind of, information push, right? Here's all the information, looking for rote memorization. One of the things that I loved about the way you teach this is it was actually bottom up. right? It was Socratic method. It was, well, why? Where would this come from? And kind of, the group kind of intuited its way through it, which I think allowed you to eat the elephant much more effectively than if it had just been shoving information downward. I think that Boyd is something that you have to constantly pick up, and you kind of play with it in small parts before it begins to make sense. Looking at that sketch, you can spend hours on any aspect of that sketch. But if you don't understand that orientation is prime, and you don't understand how it drives everything else, then you're never going to get the part of it. And I think that's what led to this kind of reductionist linear view. Is it's very complicated, and you have to take some time, or it's just really easy to go, oh, it's just these four things. And it's funny because we just had the Cato conference in San Diego, and Patrick Van Horn was out there and taught for us. And it was interesting to see the kinds of conversations that are now occurring specifically around orientation, and how to best align it. It's really interesting. I mean, it was a fascinating experience, and I think has kindled a lot of interest. I wrote the article, my column about that for this next quarter's NTOA Tactical Edge magazine is about kind of Boyd and the way you're teaching Boyd. But I've also got a couple more pieces that we're going to do about it, because I think it is something where we're going to need to constantly kind of pick up an aspect of it and discuss it. And I think the more we can do to bring that to the tactical community, the greater the value.
Well, I would say having, being the outsider and not knowing anybody in that room, that the men that walked into that room to learn were different than the ones that walked out.
For sure.
Yeah. We got to a very different place really quickly.
Which is what great mentors do. Right? Like if you go back to my conversation about the movie, what my friend did was hand me a new lens. Now you've got to be humble enough to go, hey, my lens is wrong. My lens is always wrong. Right? Well, our view is always wrong. So you can't emotionally invest in your view. You have to be willing to look at other people's lenses. But what he did was he handed me a different lens to look at the world, look at the work that I had done, and it, I'm not going to say it made me unhappy with what we had done, because what we had done served the audience we intended it for. To some degree, it was almost liberating to go, oh my God, we have all this material that we haven't used, and now we can go back and take a completely different look at this thing. And I think that that's kind of the reaction that most of the guys had to the conversation with you is, I thought I understood this. I don't. And, to some degree, it's like you pulled back the curtain and revealed that there was a gold mine behind it.
Mm-hmm.
And so that hopefully inspires them, like any good mentor does, to go dig deeper.
Well, we tell everybody, and that's what I hope people take away from this conversation, is that, and the conversation that you and I had on Debrief, that all the software you need, all the tech you need, all the books and everything that you need to make this a reality, you've been designed with it. It's all here. Like this is what we're trying to help you understand, to use. And it's when we understand these things explicitly. And the reason thanks for pointing out the Socratic approach or whatever, because that gets people to come up with their own conclusions. There's nothing that I, as a former Marine artillery officer, or, 15 years on Wall Street consultant, whatever it is, I can never presuppose that I know exactly what a SWAT officer has to do in a hostage situation at a bank, whatever. However, Socratically, through this method of teaching and this method of learning, he will come up with he or she will come up with what to do on their own once they start to break and shatter those previously held mental models and start to rewrite the new ones. It's gonna become evident, and they'll become more self-aware of what they need to do without having to tell them what to do.
It's inductive logic, right? This is not A plus B equals C ever, and
it's
especially
the combo
with
of inductive and deductive together.
Yeah.
Just like
and
destruction and creation said.
Yeah, exactly. When you look at tactical situations, no two tactical situations are exactly alike. Like they never are going to play the same game. And they don't know when it's going to start. They don't know who the players are. They don't know what the situation is. Like it is the land of unknowns. And
How did
the
they
real fight is the orientation.
What did they? Because I think I felt like I felt like I saw some orientations crash in the conference room when I didn't hand them a deck. I didn't have a slideshow. I had 3 specific things I always talk about or aim to, and then jam around and get them involved, and they built it up together with me. I felt like not handing them a deck. They were expecting enabling learning objectives, technical learning objectives, a slide deck, and they didn't get any of that. What were your thoughts on that? Because I feel like that when you involve them that way, it's going to stick and it's going to encourage them to want to learn more.
Yeah, I mean, to some degree, it's IKEA without the manual, right? And not even knowing what you're building. You're going to get all, it's the snowmobile. It's the snowmobile, but it's all the parts of the bike. It's all the parts of the boat, but none of them built into finished systems. And so I think that when you say, hey, these parts equal a boat, these parts equal a bicycle, I think that's a different experience than somebody sitting there and putting the things together. And it's interesting. One of the things that I've noticed in the tactical community, I've been in it for 40 years. I've been surrounded by SWAT teams. The guys that I originally worked with were kind of the OGs. They were the guys that had to figure it out. And they understood things at a really deep level. If you go back to the Sid Hales and Mike Hillmans and Ron McCarthy's, and you had conversations with them, they were unbelievably detailed in their thinking. And, I've noticed over my career arc that we've kind of gone away and we've lost a lot of that depth of knowledge. And it didn't dawn on me until I interviewed Mike Hillman about the '84 Olympics. He was talking about how LAPD had to figure out, it was on the heels of Munich, right? The Munich massacre happens in '72. In '84, the Olympics come to the US. And it's what causes SWAT to explode in the US is the '84 games. Because they said, we're not going to have Munich occurring in the city of Los Angeles. And so LAPD SWAT, among other things, was tasked with trying to figure out how to respond to a Munich. And when I talked to Mike Hillman was one of the original guys that did that. And I was talking to him about, what they were doing in preparation for the Olympics. And he goes, well, like as an example, we had to figure out, Munich, they put all the hostages on a bus. And so we had to figure out, how do you assault a bus? It wasn't, we needed to go to a linear assaults class. We needed to learn bus assaults. We had to figure out, how do you attack a bus? And because these guys had to build the knowledge ground up, they spent a great deal of their time in why and very little of their time in how, because there wasn't a how manual to look at. So that gave them this very broad, Simon Sinek's notion of why, gave them this very broad depth of knowledge of education in why. And they spent a lot of time looking at the opposite of what they believed because they needed to understand, I think we should do it this way. Well, why wouldn't that work? And that, much like the Socratic method, they built the knowledge and they had a very deep understanding of why. The minute they started teaching it, it became a how.
Mm-hmm.
And that the problem with having a how is when your orientation doesn't match reality and all you have is a how, you don't understand, why it doesn't match. And you can't draw inferences from the paradigms that you have, right? If I've taught you how to use a hammer in only one way, and let's just say I taught you how to use a hammer as a pry implement, you don't even understand its primary purpose or how it can be used. And it isn't until you take the time to understand, all of its capabilities that now you have this tool. So what's happened is we've seen this kind of decline in depth of knowledge, and we're not teaching why anymore. We're teaching how in everything.
Right.
We're not educating, we're training. And the problem with training is orientation is rooted largely in education, not in training.
John, I'd like to add to this, going back to what Mark did when he was out there. The co-creation of intent is what's going on when Mark is negotiating, feeling what everybody else needs, right? That's the same thing. And it's creating those affordances to understand collectively what needs to come next. And we've had Rob Gray on the podcast, who does a lot of work in constraints-led approach, ecological dynamics. So applying exactly what you said to training children, kids, NBA players, athletes to the why. You give them the affordances, that bus, and let them figure out the why behind it and the how and the execution piece of that. That is fundamental to mission command. How do you actually develop leader's intent? It's not just a leader, by the way. And that's what Moose did when he was there. He created that leader's intent, co-created with those in the room. How do you develop that? And how do you create the conditions to create an adaptable workforce team, basketball team, SWAT organization, or what might have you? So this is very critical in everything we coach and teach. And it's non-traditional because everybody, like Moose said, they want a deck. They want learning objectives. They want these things. And that's not how the world works, right? I don't have a learning objective for my children. I'm raising them, do I? Right?
I mean,
So
if you do, I'd love to know it. It's
I don't have,
my son's 24, my daughter's 20. It's been a fight trying to figure it out.
Yeah, let's stay off that one. I got a 22, yeah, 22, 20, 18, and 17. Yeah, that's enough. But to your point though, I mean I guess to a larger extent is that in any industry, you can take this exact approach to do this exact thing, and you're going to gain a lot more ground for yourself as an organization with your capability to thrive in non-standard, non-linear, complex environments versus the deck approach, the formula approach, what Ponch and I call the merchants of certainty. It doesn't work in reality.
No, no, and that's the thing is you have to take the time to become educated. Whatever your discipline is, whether it's running a business or making ballet shoes or hostage rescue, you have to take the time to become educated on the why of what you're doing, because that's where the inference comes from, right? The inference comes from a depth of understanding of the subject matter that when orientation doesn't align, you are able to draw the conclusion that now gets you the next step. When you find the thing that has never made sense. And so many of the cases that we cover on the debrief are these, like, you look and you go, whose idea was that? How the hell did that happen? And it's part of the thing I look for with cases is novelty. It's okay. And then how did you come to this conclusion and why? And how did you make the choice? Because that's the part that we're lacking as a society. And the thing is, like, as you look at the evolution of AI is going to out-recall us every single time.
Mhm.
You now have the capability of looking at almost the entire humanity and being able to ingest information. Like, we feed all of the episodes into the show into an AI engine that we can then draw off of. And I query that all the time when I'm writing articles. And there's stuff that I don't remember. I mean, I did the interviews. I sat with the guy. I'm like, holy shit, we talked about that.
How-
It's
How ironic that we come to this, because at the end of our episode on the debrief, I briefly I said this is going to take another episode, another podcast, the importance of understanding Marshall McLuhan, because you're describing how the technology and the medium of AI is affecting our orientation, which in turn affects how implicitly guides and control works, which affects, OODA overall, and the two marry each other quite well.
it's kind of terrifying, actually.
Well, if we disobey Boyd said people, ideas, things, all is in that order. And when we understand that AI serves us, we don't serve AI, then I think that we have a shot. The way Ponch and I have this discussion quite a bit. If you look at OODA loop sketch and you look at orientation, AI should be helping us augment our orientation in order to improve our implicit guidance and control, in order to improve our decisions, improve our actions, and improve our ability to learn. I think you and I were talking about this out over ramen in Pasadena, that, like, I feel that because of AI, I actually learn a lot more than I ever did. And I find myself buying more books and reading more books than I ever did, because it's pointing me out to the directions that I never thought that I hadn't considered previously.
So it's interesting. I think we're going in two directions with that regard. I think that people that are open to having their orientation disrupted, people that are craving information, AI is amazing. I completely agree with you. I mean, I'm reading books I would have never read. I'm reading papers and watching YouTube videos by people I probably would have never crossed, because something's getting suggested in the process of doing that. But I'm constantly trying to pull myself out of a thought bubble, right? I watch all of the major news sources. I don't watch a single news source. When something big happens, I will watch Fox, CNN, MSNBC, read the Wall Street Journal, look at CNBC. Like, I'm trying to get the broadest base of information I can. I think there's a small group of people that are going in that direction. But I think the majority of people are putting themselves into thought bubbles, reading news they agree with. They're surrounding themselves with friends that they agree with. And in the process, they're pulling their orientation farther from reality. I think part of what we're seeing politically currently in the country, where you have, a right and left that are neither the right nor left that they were when I was a kid. Like it's fucking confusing.
Yeah.
What our politics are even more anymore. But we no longer agree on a common set of facts.
Yeah.
And as a result, we're never going to align our orientations if we're putting ourselves in a thought bubble and only reading things we agree with and talking to people we like. We are guaranteeing that our orientation is going to be wrong.
We just published a podcast with Max Borders, who, like us, is also Gen X. And I think the fact, what you're alluding to, John, is the fact that, we are Gen X. We're not digital natives. We know what it's like to live analog. We know what it's like to live digitally. Versus a digital native, it's almost like it seems in a lot of ways that their orientation is completely wired for them by the screens that they interface with. That's all they've ever interfaced with.
Which is really scary, because when you are living in the real world and you're seeking competitive information and you're looking at other perspectives, it's very easy to know when you're being lied to. It's very easy to know when the information that you're being fed is not accurate. But when we are surrounding ourselves with our thought bubbles and we are living exclusively natively and we're relying on AI to make our decisions for us, should I go to therapy? Should I kill myself? As one recently, you've now not only given up your own ability to orient to what's going on, but you've put yourself in a situation where a very slight manipulation of that algorithm will drive you in a direction that you don't. And you saw it with kind of Russian interference in the election, and where you had both sides of a political issue being agitated by outside agitators, foreign adversary agitators. And I'm thinking the Yankees suck, and you thinking they're the best baseball team. And both of us are getting spun up by outside agitators that are probably bots to then go meet somewhere for a protest. Right. And now our realities run into each other in a way that we don't even understand each other.
I think we can bring it to a close on that note. I mean, really what you're saying and what I'm hearing is the value of understanding Boyd authentically and OODA Loop Sketch authentically is also a defense against that exact dynamic that you're talking about.
100%.
Yeah.
And I will say, Ponch, I do need to tell you one really funny Mark McGrath story before we go.
Please do.
So we're driving In-N-Out Burger.
Mm-hmm. My favorite.
And your partner over here, all of a sudden we drive past. Now, I live in Laverne. I've lived in Laverne for like 20 years. We drive past a church on D Street. You guys can look it up. It's a Presbyterian church on D Street. There's 4 of us in the car. All of a sudden Mark's like, oh my God. That's the church from The Graduate, right? And the other 3 of us look at each other like, okay, there's something wrong with this guy. And he's very animated and he's reenacting the Elaine scene where he's banging. Elaine! Yeah. Elaine! And we're kind of looking at him like he is insane. And then he pulls it up and right there.
It was actually after I left you.
It's the church from The Graduate, a movie 50 years ago.
After I left you, I went back to it to go get my pictures in and make some videos for my parents because they showed me that movie when I was young. There actually is a marker. It says that this was the movie, this is the church from the movie. And let's bring it back to the lesson. How many times have you driven by that?
Yeah, every day.
Right? How many times had I driven by that?
Yeah, once. Yeah,
orientation.
It was a fantastic
implicitly
lesson
guides and controls.
Yeah, it's a fantastic lesson on orientation, and it was also a sign that Moose is definitely some kind of savant.
He is a Cliff Clavin, yes.
Diversity is absolutely. John, close us out. Just give us a big picture view of the things that you're involved with from your company and from the other organizations that you're involved with that help
so
the tactical officers.
Probably the easiest way to think of it is my career is kind of there's 4 forks on my career, 4 points on the fork. One is that I own Aardvark Tactical and an armor company called Project 7. My job there is keeping tactical operators physically safe. Whether it's a United States Marine on a post in Somalia or it's a SWAT operator in Laverne, California, my job is to keep that guy physically safe. I do a lot of training, writing, write columns, articles for, a variety of tactical organizations. that my job is to educate him as best I can and try to improve his leadership. Then the third fork of that prong is the debrief, which is a podcast that focuses on bringing the top experts like you to the tactical community, focused exclusively. We're not doing war porn. I'm not targeting the consumer at all. My goal is a professional tactical user. That's what I'm trying to curate, a list of events and experts that will make that guy as good as he can possibly be to make him safe. And then this kind of new fork that is developed is this idea of documentary films and talking about orientations. As a public, we are misaligned on our law enforcement, and we do not see them for who they are. We do not recognize the cost that they pay, the effect that these events have on them. And so, I noticed in doing the debrief how far people's perception was. We think that when Tree of Life is over, the cops go home, everything's great. We don't understand that for Andrea and Dan to have been saved, Tim Matson had to be shot 12 times and has had 25 surgeries, and will never be back to who he was prior to that event. And so part of what I want to do with some of the films projects that we're doing is bring a lens, provide some orientation of what's actually happening in these events and with these officers, and the kind of heroics that I see every day that most people never know happen, and trying to expose that to a broader audience so that we can get a more balanced perspective of our law enforcement, because we judge them by, the 1 in a billion incident, the George Floyd, and we ignore the fact that the Pittsburgh SWAT team charged into the Tree of Life synagogue to save people that they had never met, would never meet again, and didn't know, and risked their own lives to do it. So that's kind of the fourth prong of my career arc.
Phenomenal. Well, we highly endorse the Debrief Live. Slightly biased, having been a guest. I highly recommend you get Ponch to come out there and talk about flow and states of flow.
I love it. Yeah, let's do it.
For tactical operators, we should do that too. But
for sure.
Jon Becker from Laverne, California, the site of the Church from the Graduate. Thanks for coming on No Way Out podcast and sharing the learning experience of authentic Boyd versus linear Boyd.
Thank you so much, guys. I appreciate what you do and hope you keep doing it.